Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that won't put you in debt for the next 15 years. I am Mark Stucker.
And I am Anika Madden. It is Thursday, March 22nd, and this is episode number 8, using internships and shadow days to confirm your kid's career interest. In this week's news, we're going to talk about a very controversial move by the University of California, Irvine. We're on Chapter 8 of 171 Answers, and we'll talk about the ways to get internships and shadow opportunities for our kids. And this week's question is from a mom who needs to address her daughter's anxiety in starting the college planning process and what the daughter considers to be too early.
Anika, I cannot believe that spring is here. What is up in your neck of the woods in North Carolina?
Spring snow. I mean, it was crazy. Delay in school. It did clear up pretty fast, but darn, really?
Oh, boy. Well, we had a tornado that hit sections of Fairburn here, and it knocked down a basketball hoop of my daughter's, but it didn't smash the glass.
Oh, and speaking of that, so our neighbor called us and let us know that our tree fell in our yard in Atlanta. So, yeah, crazy. Is it global warming or not? To be determined.
Yes. Let's turn to college admissions hot topics in the news.
Okay, Mark, our article for this week, craziness. It comes from the Chronicle of Higher Education, and it's entitled, What Happens When a College Accepts Too Many Students? And a quick summary, University of California, Irvine did something tremendously controversial in that first of all, they accepted more students than what they expected to accept, specifically 850 more. And so what they ended up doing, they rescinded 500 offers. and not only did they rescind 500 offers, Mark, they did it 2 months before the term was supposed to start, before school starts. I am speechless, and as a parent, I would have been extra speechless. But can you tell us what that exactly was about?
Well, it was more than they accepted. It wasn't that they accepted 850 more. It's that 850 more students accepted them than they were planning on.
Right.
So it's very common for a school to not get that number exactly right. Like, think about how difficult of a task it is. They can't wait till every single student enrolls before they send out new acceptances. So it's quite common for a school to find that more students enrolled than they anticipated, because schools don't want to take the chance of the opposite happening, right? Because they're so tuition dependent. If too few students enroll, then guess what? Mission director gets fired. You don't have enough money to fund your program, layoffs of teachers, cutting programs, all of that.
Right.
But here's the thing. Most of the time when a school over enrolls, they do not do what UC Irvine did.
Right.
Some of the most common things that are done to address this challenge in a more equitable and amiable manner, I would say, would be to go to triples in the room, right? So what you can do is, instead of doubles, you can have some more triples, throw another bed in the room, reach out to students and say, guess what? You can save X thousands of dollars if you convert to a triple. And there'll always be some people that will jump at that for the financial savings. So that's pretty common. Renting hotels out in the area is common. Renting apartments in the area is common. I've even seen this. It's not common, but I've seen a few occasions where schools built a new dorm. Usually they were kind of thinking about doing it anyway, but now there was a sense of urgency. This actually happened at Davidson for Karis when she got back from study abroad.
I remember you talking to you. We talked about that last week, right?
Yeah, we did. But I didn't say last week. What they did was they offered to take a part of the student union and convert it into some residential space, but she wasn't feeling that. So that's a common thing. And then sometimes schools can get really creative. Like during Katrina in New Orleans, they actually rented out a cruise ship.
Wow.
Because University of New Orleans over enrolled. So that's kind of thing. And I'll tell you something else that's quite common actually is you can send out an offer similar like to the triplets I talked about, where you can say, if you will come in January semester, and you can incentivize people, maybe you will take $3,000 off your package or something like that.
Right.
And because there's always going to be some people, say, that graduated January semester or even leave after one semester. So there will be some more openings. So those are kind of how it's commonly done. Now, one thing that UC Irvine did do, which I thought was an attempt to be creative, was they started their Anteater Leadership Academy. Do you remember reading about that?
Yeah, I do, Mark. But before you head into that, I want to talk about their lack of creativity, because what was most shocking to me in this article was the way that they did rescind them. So to me, the honest response would have been, hey, guys, we did something a little wrong, and this is how we're going to fix it. Where instead they went nitpicking, is what specifically called out in this article, but really scrutinizing the applications that were submitted to say, oh, you did this wrong, so you're out of here, or you listed a certain course a certain way that that didn't best represent what you really did. I mean, but the point was that they did it in a way where they tried to make it as though it was the student's fault as the reason why they rescinded the offer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree 100%. They did 3 or 4 things that schools don't normally do. One of the things they did was they said, if your transcript was late,
right.
It could be anything late. Your testing was late. You didn't put your deposit in right away. They revoked those admissions decisions, right? And that's not normally what schools do. Normally what schools will do if you're late is they'll give you ample warnings. They just understand not everybody, people are going to be late. And if anything, they will delay your place in the queue for housing or maybe course selection. That's common. But they use late transcript submission and late document submission to revoke. And it was also controversial because first generation students, they're not as good at navigating their way through the system. So it impacted them more. Right. They also did something else. So it's very common. And actually, we have an entire episode talking about whether or not colleges can rescind acceptances. And we'll get into the weeds on that one. But what they did was if your grades dipped, they rescinded your offer. Now that is something that is done, but here's the thing. Normally, in order for your admission offer to be rescinded because your grades end up being significantly different than when you actually submitted all your transcript. Normally there's at least a full letter grade and usually even more. So normally, like let's say a student was an A- student and they go to a C or C+ level. Or B goes to D+. That's normally when it happens. They got really nitpicky with, minor grade dippages led to rescinding. And then you mentioned something else that they did, which is that let's say a student misrepresented how the name of one of the classes that they were taking. There was a student who listed a computer class. Well, they listed a technical education class as a computer class, and they went in and just, Yeah. So I agree. I agree 100%. They were way overboard because they had to come up with ways, I'm going to say they had to. They chose to come up with ways that really were, inappropriate. Yeah. But one thing I did like was that Anteater Leadership Program that they attempted to
the more creative side.
Do.
Yes,
Do you want to comment on that?
Well, it was basically a buffer, I suppose, and it was targeted toward in-state commuter students, specifically middle class and above students who would be able to afford to pay. So the incentives were around, okay, if you enter into this program, you'll come in for half the tuition that it normally would have cost for you to come in as a regular, I'm probably saying the term wrong, but as a regular day student. I'm going back to boarding school, Mark.
No, that's all right. Commuter. Commuter.
So that was one of the incentives. Another incentive, they boasted, okay, you'll be in these, smaller class sizes and, just try to, kind of glamorize it a bit, which was good. It was an attempt, right?
Well, I mean, the thing is, they thought they could get 500 people to jump in it, and only 100 did. Right. And actually, even that I can't give them too much credit for, because later they were exposed to have oversold all the benefits for that program. So even in that, there was some misrepresentation. But they attempted to come up with a way, and it didn't work. And what's interesting, Anika, there was such pushback and blowback for what they did because it was so egregious that students took to Reddit, students took to Facebook, and then all these major publications started writing articles like the LA Times. They had a big expose of all the things that UC Irvine did wrong. And then Chancellor Gilman, he actually had to issue a mea culpa and apologize and fall on the sword. And they actually reversed their decision like 2 days after this article came out. Goodness. And they had to readmit those students. But here's the question I have for you. Why do you feel this is important, and what do you feel our listeners could learn? Because I can imagine someone saying, well, you know what? I'm not going to UC Irvine. And so what's the so what in this for our listeners? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So here's one key thing that you said, in that, when you talked about the grades dipping. So here's, when you're keeping yourself vulnerable to things like this happening, when you're not familiar with the process, but also something, Mark, that I know I've heard you talk about many times before is kids have to be mindful, extremely mindful, that when they get these acceptances, they still have to keep their grades up on through the end of their senior year. Because a lot of kids, go in and say, "Oh, I'm in. I'm coasting, and let me just relax for a little while." And no, don't. That's the number one takeaway. That's a huge deal in terms of the schools are still, you're accepted, but there's still, there's still a little disclaimer in there that you still got to keep your grades up. And I think the fact that I was just shocked that it happened, and the way that it happened, and that there weren't any legal parameters around it. It's just you just gotta be in tuned, to what like you said.
Yeah. Let me add a couple more. So I definitely feel that's important. Keep your grades up. Understand a school can rescind if there's grade dippage. I would also say don't misrepresent your courses in any way. Yeah. Like that student, that was picayune for the school to revoke the decision because the student said it was a computer class when it was a technical education class. But don't misrepresent and pay attention to those details. Here's another thing: pay very close attention to the requirements of what you need to submit after you have, after you have submitted your contract. Because there are additional things that you still need to do. So make sure that you follow those requirements. And then the last thing that I would say would be, we got a whole episode 58 on this, but schools are very, very conscious of what's known as their yield. And their yield is a numeric number. It's a percentage. So Anika, if you're the mission director and if you accept 1,000 kids and 500 of them come, then that's 50% yield. And they have to watch that number extremely closely because they don't want this problem to happen, right? They don't want to over enroll, and they don't want to under enroll. So if you as an applicant know that yield matters a lot, then what that means is that you need to know how to demonstrate interest, because schools will routinely turn people down because they don't think they're coming. And so we'll get into in other episodes how you do that. But I think it's important that people know that is important. And because a lot of times if a school's looking at their numbers and they're like, we have no idea if this person is coming, that in of itself for a lot of schools is enough to go from the accept pile into the wait list or even the denial pile.
And one quick thing, Mark, that one sad point of this article that we haven't mentioned yet is that, a lot of students aren't so lucky. So a lot of those kids that went through that process, they went on to their, number 2, their number 3, their number 4s. And a lot of kids don't have multiple options. So I think this speaks to the importance of widening your list of schools, and not kids. I know back in the day, I know I did, applied to 1-2 schools and I was done. But
no, that's actually a great point you're making. So that would be another takeaway for our listeners to make sure that you're not, believe it or not, this might be surprising, but the average student applies to one college. Really? The more students that apply to one college. Yes. The more students that apply to one college than any other number. So, so that's not advisable for this reason alone, right? Like what happens if you've only applied to one and you're in this situation, things aren't good.
Stuff that happened 30 years ago is still going on, Mark. What is happening?
Yes, it is. We're making progress. It's just slow.
That's right. That's
why we're doing the podcast.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, we are in our 8th chapter of the book, 171 Answers. We have 3 more episodes/chapters that deal with helping students to select the right major and career. And then we will be spending our next 17 weeks of our episodes talking about how to build the right college list. So today's chapter focuses on shadow days and internships and the pivotal role they can play in helping a student pick the right major/career. Anika, you want to take a stab at how you feel shadows are different than internships?
Yeah. So let me just dive into Jalens' story. So thanks to your great advice back in the day, Jalen. So what he did was really unique, and he reached out to his school's alumni. So he wants to be he was a science guy. He knew he wanted to go into medicine. He just didn't know what. And so he said, okay, can I get a list of all the names of our alumni that are doctors of whatever level? And so they gave him all these contacts. Fast forward the story. He met with a bacteria specialist. He met with the ophthalmologist. He met with a plastic surgeon and probably 2 or 3 more. But it was, Mark, when I tell you that was a phenomenal experience for him, oh my goodness. It was just, first of all, the connections that he made. Mm-hmm. And again, just the up close and personal, some areas he couldn't get so much the experience, because of the legal restrictions, what he can have access to. But what was also interesting about when he met with these different people, he also was able to kind of discern their personalities. So, like the bacteria specialist I think it was infectious disease or something like that. He was very like dry and, it's just like, and this is what we do all day and da 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 da. So immediately, of course, he canceled that out. So then, so then he goes on and meets with this ophthalmologist who was phenomenal. Oh my gosh, she just connected Jay with so many people, and in addition to giving him guidance. But this gentleman was so sincere and sweet and successful and renowned, and it was just amazing. Jalen for a long time, and I almost forgot about this. Mark, is hilarious because now we're in anesthesiology, but Jalen wanted to go into ophthalmology for a long time because of that experience he had with him. So I got to remind him of that. I need to call him tomorrow. I'm like, hey, you remember you wanted to go in ophthalmology? So it was the best. That's all I can say. And it is priceless for our kids to be able to have one-on-one sessions with professionals that can really speak again to the experience that it's really, really, really like. So
Anika, this is great. And I commend Jalen. He showed a lot of initiative. He was a go-getter. He had an advantage, though, that not everybody has. He attended a highly competitive high school with a very close alumni network. And so that was a natural network that was built in. He just needed to work it. For people that don't have that, I tell them first talk to your parents and see who they know. Then make a list of all the other adults that you know. And so for some people, it could be a pastor at a church. For some people, it could be counselors at school. For some people, it could be uncles. Take a look at who you know in your adult network and then tap into their network. And don't be afraid to ask them, do you know, it could be anything, right? It could be someone who wants to somebody wants to be an accountant. Do you know any accountants? Physical therapists, whatever it is you want to do, try to tap into their network, and don't just rely on your network as a kid, because it's probably not that extensive. And the one thing that I will say between shadows and internships, the basic difference is the length of time. Like a shadow could literally be 4 hours or it could be 1 day. Internships tend to be a little bit longer commitments. The other mistake sometimes people make is they feel as if they have to get paid. And one of the best things you can do is, if you can afford it and you might need to work a lot of hours, maybe pick up a paid job, is an unpaid internship. Right. Like it's the experience and the connections and the network and the validation that this is what I want to do because you've actually seen it and it's not theory to you. I never told you this before, Anika, but I remember, I had undergrad in psychology, and I was thinking for a while of going to labor industrial relations and arbitration. So I did an internship. And I remember, and this is a month free paid, voluntary internship. And I remember it was so boring to me. Like I had to read all this case law studies and study them and prepare for these briefs. And I just couldn't do it. And I'm like, no, I can't do this.
Right.
But look, that's just me. Someone else that might be exhilarating to them. But it was that. But think about it. Like I was about to go get a master's in labor and industrial relations. And so that let me know not to do that. And last week we talked about joy and how we called the school that She called the University of Georgia. She called Valdosta State. She called to talk to their counselors to talk to the counseling department to find out what they were looking for. But what we also did with Joy was we set up a shadow day and with the counselor at KIPP Metro Atlanta, South Fulton Academy. And Joy sat in counseling sessions with her and spent time with her. And that also said, you know what, this is absolutely what I want to do. So we just want to extol the value of shadow days and internships as a way of confirming that you're on the right career path and you're in the right major to get to where you're trying to go.
Absolutely. And Mark, I'll tell you that Jalen, he met with a proctologist and he was able to do some rounds with him. And so he told his wife when they got back to the house, he said, listen, make sure you wash him up before you kiss him and don't let him cook the food. And he absolutely does not want to be a proctologist.
Time for a question from our listeners.
All right, Mark, we got another awesome question. This one comes from Dawn in Ohio. And it reads this way, Mark. It says, my oldest daughter started the college process in January of her junior year in high school, following the school schedule. And that for us felt very rushed and stressful for us, the parents, and for her. So from that, we decided that we would start earlier with my second daughter, who is now a sophomore in high school and was on board because she saw the stress that her sister went through. But recently, she told us that she is feeling overwhelmed and anxious about us starting so early and asked us to back off. How do we balance what we know as parents with what our child is capable of handling at this point?
All right. So this is a great question. It's a deep question. It's something I have some experience with. So first of all, I got to say this. You know, I love my daughters. I talked about Joy and Karis a lot. But they are very different. Mm-hmm. And when I went through the process with Karis, who's 3 years older than Joy, Karis was the easiest person to work with because she's like, Dad, you know this stuff better than I do. So all I did was I asked her all the questions to find out what she wanted in a school. I had a few things I needed to have in place because I'm going to pay for something that's going to have excellence. And we built her list according to, the things she wanted and the few things that Anitra and I needed. And I said she could select from the schools on that list. Mm-hmm. And it was the most seamless process. Then Joy came along. And here's one thing I love about my kids. They don't mind me using them as examples. Joy was that strong-willed kid, right? So she pushed back on me pretty aggressively. Test prep, she pushed back. Visiting colleges, she pushed back. She wanted to play Division I basketball. I thought Division II or III was the level she could play at. I knew she wouldn't be happy if she didn't get playing time. She pushed back. So I went through a lot of this and experientially with my own daughter. So the first thing that I will say is if you try to force a student against their will, it won't work. They'll shut down. They'll be contrarian. They'll dig their heels in. So knowing that won't work, the only thing that I've found that works is inspiration. And the only way that you will be able to inspire them is if several things are in place. First of all, you have to appeal to their own self-interest and you have to genuinely appeal to their own self-interest. Mm-hmm. They have very good detectors to tell if you're not. And so let's say a parent really wants their kid 30 or 40 minutes away because they want to be able to be really, really close. So the kid will sense that and pick up on that and rebel. And so you have to really genuinely have their best interests at heart, and they have to be convinced of that. That's extremely important. Sometimes you need to set parameters because students have this misperception that they can go to any college that they want to, and it's somehow their entitled right to go there. And a lot of times just for financial reasons alone, that is not going to be viable. And kids respond to boundaries. So, one of my favorite chapters in the book, it'll be one of my favorite episodes, is when we do episode 21, because we're going to take people through a very detailed process on how to know whether a school is affordable, how to know how much you can afford to pay so that you're going into the college process with this is our dollar amount. For one family, it might be 8,000. For another family, it might be 38. For another family, it might be 68. This is a bottom line. This is our number. This is what you'll contribute, and this is what we will contribute. Now, when you have those clear-cut boundaries, kids generally will respond. But the problem happens is when you come in at the last second after you've made them feel like they can go wherever you want, and then you come in and say, oh, this is too expensive. So establishing clear financial boundaries is helpful, and saying some of those schools are not going to be affordable. So that's really important. The other thing that's really important in this situation is every kid gets to the point where they kind of tune their parents out a little bit. Like, there is true that familiarity breeds contempt. So it's true. So, you have to get some other voices in their ear.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to share a couple of things on that in a second. But Anika, I wonder if anything I've said so far resonates with you.
Well, I'll tell you what, the thing that sticks out in my mind is the kid is pushing back on what? Because are you trying to go visit 12 colleges in the next 2 weeks? Are you trying to get them to go to apply to 15 programs in the next 2 days? Like, what are you presenting to them that's turning them off? And that resonates with me because I'm right here with Janaea, who's a sophomore in high school. And I'm like, hey, little lady, we got to get our top list. Like, it's all about the top list. That's all I need you to do. Just focus on the list. And I'll tell you, that's a process in itself, just to get her to sit down and to focus on that. So I just wonder what it is that literally we're talking about kids pushing back on. Like, what is too much, really too much, and what is reasonable in terms of saying, okay, these are some of the basic things that we at least need to cover now, and pace yourself. It's all about time management, right? So,
but here's the thing, Anika, I agree with that, but there are a lot of times when the parent is actually right. So, for example, let's just use test prep.
Okay.
You kind of know that in order to get into the schools you're interested in, to get the packages you're looking for, and to get scholarship money, merit money, this, that, there, you're going to have to bring those test scores up.
Sure.
And the kid doesn't want to do it. They just don't want to do it.
Right.
And so a lot of times, there are parents that are way overboard. Obviously, they're, drilling their kid with stuff out of the womb. I'm not talking about that. Like, there really are instances where the parent is right. It would be in the student's best interest to take more interest in the process earlier than they do. But they they can have a lot of misperceptions in their mind. One can be that, college is super easy to get into anyway, so why do I need to do all this? Or the opposite. I'm like intimidated by this because I don't think I'm getting anywhere, so I just shut down. So I see a lot of times when it really would be advisable for the student to start the process early, and there's resistance. What is helpful is to get another voice in their ear. Now, just this week, I've had 3 different people that have reached out to me. In fact, in all instances in the last 72 hours. One was a class I was asked to teach. Specifically because the students weren't listening, they're shutting down. And I was asked, could I come in and teach this class so they could have another voice that could, and then I had a parent that called me and I feel like my child is tuning me out. They need to hear another voice. Would you be willing to talk to them? And then today at 4:00, I was talking to a parent who was having problems getting through with their child. And she started using her older son, who's an attorney in DC, and he started being the one, and she's responding more to him. So a lot of times you have to find that other voice that's got wisdom and let them deliver a similar message. And a lot of times that other voice will be very effective if it is a teen, if it's another student, or even if it's not a teen, if it's somebody younger, like it could be a first or second year student in college, someone who they'll relate to,
just somebody else outside of their parent.
Somebody else who's got wisdom, that can deliver the voice. Because they just hear us all the time, and we, they kind of tune us out a little bit.
No, Mark, you don't do that.
And listen. Every student is different too. And there are so a lot of times people will tell me, they'll ask when should you start the process? Right. And it depends on the kid, because I've seen, 9th graders and even younger that love to visit college campuses and go on trips and tours. And then I have others that, they're in the 11th grade and they don't want anything to do with it. And And so here you are, the kid's in 11th grade. The parent knows from the other kid that, gee, we need to get going and start with this process. And they don't want to do it. If you can, but it will not work to force them against their will. So you've got to try inspiration. And sometimes if you can't get to the point where inspiration works, it's just going to mean that that kid is going to lose out on certain opportunities. That might be what ends up limiting their options. Yeah. But I have not seen forcing them against their will work.
Right.
It just doesn't. So you've got to try inspiration. And once again, find out if you can hear what they're really saying between that resistance and seeing if you can isolate what that is.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times what they're really saying is not what you think they're saying, right? They could be saying, I'm just so stressed out right now. I just don't know what I'm going to do. I'm overwhelmed. And you think they have no interest, but they're really overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Or they could be saying, I don't really feel you have my best interests at heart. I feel you have an agenda. And therefore, I don't know if I want to trust you because you might want me just to go to the schools that you want me to go to. And you're pulling me back to your alma mater or something to go where you went to school to relive your experience. But I want something different.
Oh my goodness, these kids. But I tell you what, I really like that opportunity angle because, that good old fashioned FOMO, fear of missing out. I think that's I think that's pretty common with teens of any age or level. I think that would be most effective to say, hey, if you want this is what you got to do to get there. Really paint that picture of where they want to be, where they want to be. But hey, you're not going to get it if this ain't happening. So
exactly. You've got it. I mean, and there's different ways that picture can be painted, right? So let's say someone knows that they want to go to a school and let's say they know they want to go to medical school, and there's some schools that you think might be a good for them to consider, and they have no interest in those schools whatsoever. If some information can be provided from them about how good their pre-med program is or their medical placement is, and if that information can come from sources other than you, then that's your best chance.
Wow. Mark, you rock.
You rock too. You know what, Anika? Before we call it a day, do you want to share something we're kind of excited about that we've been working on, a project that's finally here? Oh my goodness,
Mark, we got a new website. Woohoo! The best news we've heard all day. Well, all 48 hours.
And why don't you let our listeners know what the website is? And we have like four sections on the website if you want to touch on them.
Because just listen to how critical this is, folks. I mean, listen to this knowledge. So the website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. And where you can not only listen, obviously you can still go to your favorite podcast listening apps, but it's there on the website for your listening pleasure. You can learn a little bit about me and Mark and even our sound engineer, Esteban Sarto.
Shout out to Esteban.
Big shout out to Esteban. Huge shout out to Esteban. And it's a repository of our information. And we look forward to adding creative things. We want to get our listeners on there. We want to do all kinds of fun stuff. But it was a really fun start and very, very excited about it. So yay. Thanks for pointing that out, Mark.
Yeah. So check out Your College Bound Kid if you get a chance.com this week. And then something else you'll notice is a little different is we have a new email for sending questions in. You want to share that, Anika?
Yes. Questions at yourcollegeboundkid.com. And that's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Keep awesome questions. I mean, what are we? Episode 8, Mark? These questions have been phenomenal. So please keep bringing them in. Questions at yourcollegeboundkid.com. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. And please be sure to click that share button and send it to someone that you know who could really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. Marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And Your College Bound Kid is produced by Esteban Sarto. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, just go right to 171answers.com. That is 171answers.com.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like answered on the show, please email us at questions at yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in each episode. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.